So Karen, like, you don't need to do these slides?
I will just say very quickly, we're gonna do the same thing we did yesterday. I'm gonna show you the overview of the numbers. I don't think it's all the same people as far as I can tell, so I don't, other than Clarissa, who I can cover this with anytime, but I know I'm not gonna go through the modeling overview again.
Okay.
Because I did that yesterday. I'm just gonna kind of show you the numbers and then let Gori take it away on how we got there. So you can go to the next. These are, like we showed yesterday for room heat pump. These are the TSB on top numbers for induction cooking. You can see that the total TSB forecast is for over the 20-year period is for $561 million. Again, you see with the societal cost test, the number is much higher, and you can see very clearly that that's coming from the higher GHG. In large part. And then with regards to cost effectiveness, this MTI does not is below 1 benefit cost ratio for the TRC test at 0.9. It's 0.87 if we said we do have a use case with negative incremental costs, and it's 0.87 for that. It does pass for the PAC test and the societal cost test. So that is the overview of the numbers, but we're going to do the same thing we did yesterday. Gori is going to talk about the market adoption. If you remember, well, if you show the next slide, I'm not going to walk through it too much, but if you just, you have to click it like 5 times. Stacy, bring it all up. Same slide I showed yesterday. And once again, just remember there's a market adoption forecast over there on the right, net incremental market adoption that feeds the cost effectiveness model. So Gori's going to talk about how we developed that market adoption forecast. And then Matt is going to take us through the details on the cost effectiveness for this one. Any questions about that before we turn it over to Gori?
All right, Gori, you're on.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
Okay, Gori, just pull. Let's see if I can do this. Just
Am I too loud or too soft?
a little too loud. So maybe pull away just a little.
Is that better?
Maybe just a little bit more.
Is that better?
No. It doesn't work. Try it now, Gori.
Is that better now?
Okay, that's better. There you go.
Okay.
right,
Let
great.
me know if I get loud at any point. Okay.
Okay.
Again, we have spoken about this slide. All the definitions are the same, consistent with the evaluation framework. There's one thing I do want to add, which is when we are forecasting adoption, either BMA or TMA, we are forecasting adoption as of 3 different products, as Ellen mentioned: the 240 volt induction, the 120 volt battery equipped induction, and the 240 volt radiant that is Energy Star certified. So those are the 3 products that are part of the MTI, and we are sort of forecasting them separately and then sort of aggregating them. We also need to track purchase of the following 3 products which compete with the 3 products I just mentioned. For following products. One is the 240 volt coil, the 240 volt radiant that is not Energy Star certified, and of course gas. So there's sort of these 6 products that forms the choice set, the superset of products that a consumer can purchase. The last 3 products which are not part of the MTI, they are being forecasted, but they're sort of behind the curtain. We, from a modeling perspective, we are keeping track of them, but many of the results that I'm going to show, I'm sort of not including them. Next slide, please. Again, I think we covered this in a lot of detail yesterday. The key point out here is for single family households, which is the left figure, in the baseline, 18% will adopt the product. In presence of the MTI, 45% will adopt the product. In case of multifamily, the corresponding numbers are 20% and 40%. And hence the difference of 27 percentage point for single family, that's sort of the MTI induced adoption. That's the benefit of the MTI. Next slide, please. This is sort of the same curves, except that the units has been changed to number of households, millions of single family households on the left and millions of multifamily households on the right. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is till now we have been talking in terms of number or proportion of households. This is in terms of units of cooking products, and by cooking products here we are referring to standalone permanently installed cooktops or ranges, different types of ranges. As you can see, the data is disaggregated by single family, multifamily, and new construction. As before, the first three columns, TMA, BMA, RA, program verified. That gives us the net incremental of approximately 3.3 million cooking products that may be attributed to the MTI. And from there, that's a California-wide number from which we remove approximately 26% that is attributed to households outside the IOU territory. And the final number of 2.5 odd million is the number that is used for cost effectiveness calculations. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is where sort of things are very different from what I presented yesterday. First of all, we have two separate models, one for existing households and one for newly built housing units. For adoption by existing households, we developed a stock turnover model. The model starts with the age distribution of cooking appliances currently installed in households. And then it has a probabilistic model that sort of determines the retirement of these installed appliances in each of the years of the forecast period from 2024 to 2045, 2050 actually, but for cost effectiveness 2045. And when an appliance is retired based on this probabilistic curve, it is replaced with a new appliance. So the model then considers the relative market share of the different technologies that I talked about during such replacement decisions. So it's sort of a two-step. You retire and then you purchase a new one. And that's all that the stock turnover model is. The new construction model focuses on new construction decisions. So it starts with a forecast of how many units would come online, how many housing units will come online in each of the forecast years. And then it sort of comes up with a projected market share for different cooking technologies, taking into consideration various trends as well as the MTI interventions, which Ellen talked about. And I'm going to delve a little deeper into each of these going forward. Next slide, please. So this is my biggest slide, most of my time I'm going to spend here. And here I'm sort of delving into the two models that I just spoke about and how I make differences between the baseline and TMA in presence of the MTI. The three key assumptions that I have to make. The first assumption revolves around retirement of appliances. So in the baseline, we consider a retirement schedule that is consistent with historical trends. I'm calling it the normal retirement, and that accounts for both normal end-of-life replacements as well as early retirements, say that happens because of a household decides to upgrade or remodel. And the retirement schedule is based on analysis by the Department of Energy EERE study. They did this very sophisticated study to understand the implications of Energy Star specifications in 2022, and they sort of tracked shipments over the past 55 odd years. And they developed a stock turnover model, and we sort of adopted that stock turnover model for the purposes of our modeling. In presence of the MTI, we assume that the retirement schedule is going to be accelerated compared to historical trends. So more people are going to retire their existing equipment at a faster rate than what they have done in the past. And I'm going to show the two retirement schedules in the next slide. The second, no, please go back. Sorry about that. The second assumption is transition out of gas. How many households are going to transition out of gas? And in the baseline, we assume very limited transition out of gas-based cooking. This is partly based on historical trends. The share of gas cooking in California has been constant at 33% for the last 20 years based on EIA REX, multiple EIA REX survey, as well as the US Census American Housing Survey. It's also based on the fact that the CEC 2023 Integrated Energy Policy Report, IEPR report, they forecast that residential natural gas consumption is going to stay steady at whatever is the current level, even if they are assuming that a lot of households are going to adopt heat pumps for space conditioning. So even if a lot of people are moving the space conditioning to electricity, the overall residential natural gas consumption is going to stay steady. And that means that, gas is going to be a dominant fuel in cooking going forward as per IEPR. But our baseline assumption does take into consideration recent developments, which like the CPUC's recent decision to remove subsidy on natural gas service line or electricity service line for houses with natural gas. I know those regulations are targeted at new construction, but we assume that they will have over time impact on the second-hand replacement market, or they'll be followed by regulations that probably impact the second-hand market. So we sort of take all this into account as we consider how many households are going to transition out of gas in the baseline. But in presence of the MTI, we assume a high proportion of households with gas cooking are going to move to electricity, and various MTI interventions can be linked to it. Even greater awareness among people of the health risks of gas cooking, the more price competitiveness of induction and radiant, the lower prices of 120 volt, which is, you can easily transition to a 120 volt if you have a gas cooktop. And the prices of 120 volt is going to be lower in presence of the MTI. So all these different factors sort of justify our assumption that more people are going to transition in presence of the MTI. And then, of course, I'll quickly talk about the third assumption, which is this one has to do with now that you have retired, you have decided you're going to move out of gas or whatever is the old cooktop. What appliance are you going to purchase? In the baseline, we assume that induction will have a smaller share. Radiant would be the dominant technology. Someone spoke about price advantages and many of these factors. It's a more mature product than induction. And then, of course, within induction also 120 volt will continue to be a very niche player, like, very few people are going to have it. But in presence of the MTI, our assumption is induction is going to dominate. And 120 will be more than a niche player. 120 will be sort of the bridge or the product that will allow people to move from gas to electricity without doing expensive upgrades. The last thing I want to say about this slide is there's a lot of data, a lot of inputs that helped us come up with these assumptions. Of course, the biggest one is the DOE EERE report. Then we have, of course, we had the Delphi panel. We had a market research survey of households and property managers. A lot of studies have forecasted energy use in California, like the CEC study I said, and others in the Pacific division, like the EIA AEO study, which forecasts residential, including cooking fuel usage. So all of these sort of helped us come up with these assumptions. Now we can go to the next slide. Okay. Like last time, sort of, we segmented our population into the existing households into 3 categories. Because we believe that the decision-making process, the kind of factors that will influence the retirement decisions as well as which product they will adopt will differ based on what equipment they have currently. The three categories. One is houses with gas cooking. They 9.3 million. 80% of single-family households have gas cooking currently, roughly 50-55% of multifamily. So together, approximately 70%, as Ellen mentioned. And then households with coil. These are mostly multifamily households that are rented, and households with radiant, 2.2 million. And then we have the new construction, 0.8 million. So it's basically 0.8 million housing units are going to come online in the next 20 years. As you can see, households with gas cooking sort of dominate the segment. Go ahead. Yeah.
Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, and do you know the radiant induction, is that mostly radiant? Because the size
Mostly
of it.
radiant. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, and here is sort of I'm jumping to the result here, and I'll tell you why I'm showing these results. What the additional numbers are showing is of the total net incremental adoption that we showed, that I showed a couple of slides back. 81% of the incremental adoption is attributed to households with gas cooking. The remaining, the next big one is a 12% by households with radiant, as they retire their existing radiant and adopt new radiant or induction. Because households with gas cooking is sort of the biggest, the most influential segment from a cost effectiveness perspective. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to dive deeper into the methods we used for that household. In the appendix, of course, we have described the methods for all 4 of them in a lot of detail, and I can answer any questions for other 3, but right now I'll just jump into the ones with gas cooking. Next slide, please. Okay. So here is the retirement schedule, or the retirement, the probabilistic curve that we borrowed from the DOE EERE study. And just to help you understand the curve, on the y-axis is a proportion of units that are still operational. X-axis is the age of the equipment, and it goes from 1 year to 25 years. And to understand the curve, I'll focus on the 2 points. The first red dot, the one on the top, that's at the intersection of 80% on the y-axis and 12 years on the x-axis. That indicates that if 100 units are installed in a given year, then 12 years later, 80 of those 100 units will still be in operation. In other words, 20 of the remaining units have either been retired either because of product failure or because households have decided to migrate, upgrade. But effectively, after 12 years, 80% are still in operation. The second dot, which is at the intersection of 50% and approximately 14 and a half, 15 years, that represents a median, and that's the EUL of gas cooking product, which is the same EUL number from the DEER database that's used in California. So what this curve represents is how have people in the last 40, 50 years retired their their gas cooktops once they have purchased it. And we have sort of adopted the same curve going forward in the baseline. Next slide, please. The dashed line that I've just added here represents the accelerated retirement because of the MTI intervention. And as you can see, what it is effectively saying is people with older equipment may end up replacing their equipment faster than what they had done before. In terms of a statistic to show how much we accelerated, we sort of reduced the average age of an equipment from approximately 15 years to by 2.5 years, so 12 and a half years. So we sort of pushed back the average age by 2.5 years. But most of that is coming because people with older equipment are going to retire the gas cooktop. Next. Okay, so that's the sort of, okay, households have decided to retire their equipment and move out of gas. Now this is sort of, okay, now that they're in the market, what are the equipment that they are going to purchase, and what is the relative share of those equipment? I've not included coil in here because I'm assuming that households who have decided to move from gas to electric, they're not going to invest in an outdated technology. They're anyway going to, most of them are going to invest in a 240 volt plug point, and if they're going to make that investment, as well go for a superior product. So coil is not here. What is here is the two types of radiant, which are the lightest shade and the top, and the two types of induction, which are the darker shades and in the bottom. A couple of points come out if you compare left to right. If you look at the left, radiant sort of dominates the market. If you just compare the Energy Star Radiant with the non-Energy Star Radiant, I sort of assume that Energy Star gets a 50% market share, which is sort of consistent with Energy Star's share in dryers and clothes washer, 50-55%. If you look at the bottommost curve for 120 volt induction, you'll see that the kink in the curve happens at 2035 for baseline and approximately 2030, 2028 for MTI. And that's directly linked to so the left one is directly linked to our understanding of when 120 volt products would be sort of entering the market at competitive prices in the baseline, and then the MTI intervention, which is going to pull it forward by approximately 5 years in the MTI scenario. There's one other point I want to make here, which is, we sort of looked at what experiences from European market to see, how have they transitioned to induction. So on the right-hand side, where induction is almost like 70% of the market in or 65% of the market in 2045. That is sort of what is the share of induction in countries like Germany, Finland, Netherlands, Denmark. They have a 50 to 80% market share as of today. Induction has a 50 to 80% market share as of today. On the left-hand side, this reflects the share of induction in EU as a whole. The EU has some laggards like Italy, England, and approximately 30% of the market is induction. And so left-hand side sort of reflects that fact. Next slide, please. Okay. So again, sort of whatever all those assumptions that you saw here sort of reflect here in a different format, which is in the forecast period 2024 to 2045. 120 volt would still be a very niche product, 7% of all the cumulative units sold, while it will be a slightly less niche. It will be more it will have a broader adoption in TMA of 13% odd. And but if you add the first two rows, which gives the total share of induction, what you can see is the induction sort of dominates. And a lot of people who would have otherwise bought a radiant are going to purchase induction because of presence of the MTI interventions. Next slide, please.
The question?
Oh,
Well, it looks like in the, with the program scenario, the amount of radiant has trebled in this period. And I recognize this is cumulative and not a rate, but it seems like it still seems to forecast that radiant hasn't been subsumed by induction. It's actually got a larger cumulative market share than 240 volt induction through the period. I'm just trying to figure out if the forecast and the sort of strategies we talked about 15 minutes ago line up. It's a good question.
well, there are two parts to that. And the first part I can answer, which is relatively easy, which is, why all of them have increased. And why is that? Well, that's because of the accelerated retirement that we, if you go back to, I believe it is slide 31. Slide, I'm sorry, it is 33. If you would, yeah. So there are actually two assumptions that are driving the increase in cumulative adoption of all products. One that I show here, which is more number of people are going to migrate away from gas, or more number of people. Actually, there is an accelerated retirement of gas cooktops. And one thing that I haven't shown here is more number of people who are retiring their gas are sort of migrating to electrification. So and that explains the greater number. I forget what was if you don't mind repeating your question again.
Well, it seemed like the scenario had a lot of people moving from something to radiant, and the sort of strategy discussion we had a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Saw radiant as a bridge, but something that would sort of slowly fade into history over the course of the period as induction prices got lower because of induction's superior performance characteristics.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a lot of people who converted and stayed with radiant.
Yeah, and that is probably an artifact of the fact that the radiant share will increase from a very low percentage today to a high percentage. The market share will increase from a low percent today to a high percent in 2045, and these cooktops have a 15-year average lifetime. So people who purchase these products in the intervening years before induction sort of starts dominating the market, those purchases are sort of affecting the cumulative numbers that you see here. So yes, radiant is a bridge, and if you look at the curve on the right, the figure on the right, it does show that radiant is a bridge to electrification, and in fact by 2035 or so, they will have less, they'll have a share which is less than induction. But people who have purchased before, so if I change the table to how many people purchase in a given year, the share of radiant sort of decreases to a very small number by the time you reach 2045. Does that answer your question, your question or concern?
It sounds like it's really about when does things shift from radiant to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You're expecting that delta between, induction and radiant to continue to narrow as time goes on.
I was sort of thinking the radiant share wouldn't be I'm reading this right, which I'm not sure, increasing through 2036.
Like to see that little peak shaved down sooner. Yeah.
Go to the next slide with the numbers.
Yeah.
This is what was confusing.
Yeah.
The TMA number of units for radiant look larger. I mean, they're 47% of the total. That doesn't seem to line up with the picture that you showed us in the previous slide.
Is that the market share picture?
That,
Yeah, so they're saying this TMA and this
Incremental
TMA.
versus cumulative. it's like-
Just, yeah. Cumulative, in the forecast period is through 2040.
Or 2045. Fine. Okay. So if you go back, one thing I would say, the radiant out there in the table represents both the ES radiant and the non-Energy Star certified radiant. And then if you look at the curve on the right, effectively I'm drawing a line from the left, the 0 2023 point to the 0 100 2045, and that is approximately 50%. I just want to say that the sum of the two lightest shades is approximately 50%. And the sum of the two darkest shades are approximately 50%. And that's what is reflecting in the last table.
So the table, just to clarify, Corey, the table on slide
This one.
35, not separating Energy Star versus non-Energy Star radiant.
Yeah. All right.
And I'll tell you the reason why I made this. So yes, I sort of pointed it out without stating this. What I'm saying, what we did is, if CalMTA is encouraging people to replace their gas cooktop and electrify, we are going to include it in our cost effectiveness calculations, even if they electrify to a non-Energy Star radiant. Because the benefits are, the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions are directly attributable to CalMTA intervention. So that's a sort of a finer detail which I didn't mention, but we sort of mention it in the report. That's not the case with the next market segments. The other three segments, the new construction, households with coil and households with radiant, were sort of replacing the products. But for this market segment, we made that change.
I brought this up, I would maybe try to end the conversation with, think about it. It just seems like a high share of radiant to me, but it's not like I know what's gonna happen in the future.
Any other questions?
Well, I would add yes to what Fred said, but I would also add, as you think about it, think about where you are on the diffusion of innovation curve. Because the early adopters and maybe some of the early majority will have more likelihood to go to induction. But if you've got laggards or late majority, price is a very big deal for them. And they may be the ones buying the radiant cooktops.
So it's a timing question.
It's a timing.
This is why.
Yeah. So that would be one way to think about it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the price sort of assumptions we made is, I think in the MTI milestones, by 2030, and Ellen, please correct me if I'm wrong, by 2030, the price of a 120 volt would be no more than 2x the price of an equivalent 240 volt induction. So there is the price, and the induction, of course, has a price premium over radiant. And all of, so it's a response to higher prices on part of the customers, the price elasticity of demand.
Right.
I have a question, thanks. So this is sort of jumping ahead to Matt, but as we're looking at the adoption forecasts and the different mix of technologies, I'm thinking that of course plays into negative grid benefits, which impacts, both the positive GHG benefits, but also the negative grid benefits. So the more of the non-Energy Star radiant product you have, the bigger that on-peak grid negative impact we're going to see, et cetera. And so when we get to Matt's piece and talking about TSB and cost effectiveness, I'll be interested in whether you all did or think it would be worth doing some sensitivity analyses to get at different TSB and cost benefit ratios, making different assumptions about the growth in radiant versus induction technologies. for purposes of supporting the application.
I've got a different point if we've sufficiently beat this one. And this is something where I have no data. I don't know if you found any more current data on what loads are from equipment. I've got a story that's playing in my head that I can't prove that says that patterns in people's cooking behavior have shifted a lot in the last few years. You know, I mean, the long story is pandemic hit, all of a sudden everybody was breaking bread. Stores ran out of yeast. Nobody was baking bread. They all learned about Panera. They're all doing takeout now. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but, you know, my anecdotal knowledge is not only have cooking patterns changed among the people I know, but there's a high variance. I worry, you know, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is that one of the main drivers of our strategy is how to deal with the increase in costs to the consumer from cooking. And if you've got a skewness, even if the numbers are the right average, you got a skewness, and there's a quarter of the people who cook a lot and 3/4 of them who hardly cook. That's 3/4 for whom the rate impact of fuel switching is much less consequential. And that might impact how you market. I'm not worried about that as much for cost effectiveness. But I do wonder whether by using data that's several years old, which is maybe all we got, we're overstating the rate impact. And I really wonder whether there's any way to look at the variance in that data to see if there's a large population for whom it's less consequential. And then there's another population for whom it's more consequential. And maybe those people are also better healed and they don't care as much. I don't know. I mean, all that's asking for a lot out of the data, but it's material.
Well, when was the load shape for electric ranges updated for DRG?
We're not using Deere for
For this.
the UBI calculation. We're using an EPRI load shape.
Oh, okay.
The Deere load shape is A, very old. B is actually a residential dishwasher load shape.
Oh.
Yeah, like,
Oh, that's
being updated.
perfect.
But we
Makes
use the
all
EPRI
sense in the world.
load shape, which is much more current. I'm trying to look it up right
If
now.
it's post-pandemic, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure when it came out, but I'll find out.
I mean, we're just about the load number, you know, kilowatt hours per
Yes.
household.
Yeah.
You know, I do not have information about, I don't know much about the load shape, but what I can say is the EIA Rex, the next iteration of which was rolled out last week, they are trying to ascertain change in cooking behavior of people because of the pandemic. So I think once we have the new EIA Rex data, we'll have much, which might take a year or two, we'll have much closer information about how people's cooking behavior has changed.
I'm more worried about your strategy and cost effectiveness because all these are rough numbers anyway, and they look pretty good. So that gives you some time to adopt your strategy based on what you find out.
Just for what it's worth, the Northwest has the home energy use measurement data set that's actual load shapes. I think we have some cooking load shapes, but I'm not positive. I could do some research on that.
And if you have the load shapes, then you have the loads too, because it's endless metering.
Did that information go public yet?
Um,
I thought it was only for the funding members.
At the hourly level, it's public. If you want something below that, then I think we have to talk, but at the hourly level, it's public.
We have Matt Wisniewski, who's gonna, from a senior associate at Cadmus, who's going to share with us the cost effectiveness modeling. Great. Thank you, Matt.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. So once again, we're gonna go over the induction cooking cost effectiveness modeling. I will warn folks who were here yesterday, this is very similar to the presentation from yesterday, so we'll actually move through it relatively quickly. I will pause and try and spend a little bit of time on the areas where there was meaningful difference between the room heat pump and induction MTIs, but for the most part, again, these slides are very familiar. So again, TSB adopted or brought into use in 2024. We understand that time value of energy is very important, how we come up in the discussion of the load shape for induction cooking, that decision point, which has some significance on a one distinction that we had between this measure and room heat pump. Again, we ran all of the same California specific cost effectiveness tests, the TRC, the program administrator cost test, and the societal cost test. Again, the key differences there are in the cost and benefits from the different perspectives, but I don't necessarily want to get into that if there are questions. I will linger on this one for just a second. Obviously, we have a number of counterfactuals and efficient equipment decision types. There is one scenario where, based on a review of current products available in California, we did find a negative incremental measure cost where gas burners were replaced by induction or Energy Star radiant cooktops. Some of this has to do with the relative cost of those Energy Star radiant units relative to gas as a category that pulled that just slightly below zero. This is not the majority or even a plurality of the measures. So the majority of these measures do have positive incremental measure costs, which is the primary driver for our TRC results. In particular, the technology with battery is still quite a bit more expensive than the equivalent technologies. I think that's not really a surprise to folks. Given that there is still a fairly significant assumption of adoption in the MTI of those battery capable units over time, even though we do project over time the reduction in per unit IMCs, when you compare a very basic Energy Star non-compliant coil or radiant cooktop or a gas burner range, something you would find at Home Depot or Lowe's, against a top of the line induction stove with a battery, based on current prices, which is what we're using as our inputs, you see a very big delta. Again, we expect that to drop over time, but right now it has a very high starting point, and that does affect sort of the TRC for those segments. Jack.
Does the gas burner range counterfactual traded with an or changed out to an efficient induction or Energy Star radiant range? Is that $501? Does that include electric panel upgrades for service?
We did not model any non-product specific related assumptions. One, the reason we didn't try and model that is we were not entirely sure if we could come up with an accurate proportion of the number of use cases where that would be required. Obviously, there are many homes where a service system might need to be upgraded. You may have to make a change to a panel. In addition, the location of a panel in a home might substantially change the amount of money it would cost to put a 220 volt outlet in a kitchen. So we did not attempt to come up with, say, what would the average value would be there, because it was very difficult for us to find, one, reliable prices, and two, a sense of how we could model that for a California specific measures. We didn't put that assumption in there. I assume that it would be required in a number of cases, but we just didn't come up with a valid number that we thought would be appropriate to include. So we just tried to stay apples to apples with just the cooktop and the
I think you have to do that, because if somebody has a gas range oven combo today, they do not have enough amperage anywhere in the kitchen to serve an induction stove or even a radiant stove for that matter. So there's going to be an electrical upgrade cost to go from a gas burner range to the efficient case. It's not just the incremental cost of the equipment. There has to be an electrical upgrade there.
You know, to add on to that, I think you have to further differentiate a panel upgrade versus just an upgrade to 240 volts.
Yes.
Because, when I added my induction, I'm doing my electrification incrementally, right? And induction was the first thing I did, and it didn't need a panel upgrade, but it did require a 240 volt, electrical circuit, which that cost is a lot less than if I had to do that plus the panel
I
upgrade.
totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe it's a question for Randall. Does anybody know offhand if other measures in California, like a heat pump water heater, for example, which is an electrification focused measure, does that include the additional wiring costs? Because I think it doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know. In cost effectiveness, you mean? Yeah. It's included in the Tech Clean California program.
It has an incentive.
Yeah, as an incentive. Seems like they would have had to have included that in their cost effectiveness, but they don't.
I think it's an incremental measure cost. But
Yeah,
That's
Ah,
something
you
we
know?
need to-
Also, that,
Yeah. Oh, Christy, go ahead.
there are estimates of infrastructure upgrades in electrification measures. Sometimes they're separated from I'm not sure the details, but I know that they're included.
And just apologies for my omission. So Christy Dorick from the CPUC is on the virtual, and apologies, Christy, again for missing you. And then Margie Gardner's also on. So just a heads up. Normally we can see those other folks online, but for whatever reason, the way this is manifesting, it's not showing. Okay, Fred, and then Cyan.
Just to muddy the waters a little, in my house, we did not need a panel upgrade because the house had gone from electric range to gas to induction. Now, it's a 1940s house and more of a Northwest thing. I don't know, but it's not an absolute. But the other thing is, if you've got a cost like that, that affects a fraction of homes, and you can't estimate the cost, the other thing you can do is dampen your penetration rate to get away from the issue unless it doesn't leave you with much.
Yeah, it's an alternative approach.
Cyan.
Is an induction and an Energy Star radiant range, are they the same cost?
no, not necessarily. There's a fairly big delta between a standard Energy Star radiant range and some of the more top of the line induction ranges. We looked at a broad category and came up with a value that was sort of representative of either, I guess, a median price for those various pieces of technology.
So then what does the replacement cost represent?
So that replacement situation is the delta between a non-Energy Star electric or a gas stove. Again, a range of products. So we actually looked at a number of products, but they tend to be cheaper in both the gas. Well, some gas products, I will pause, are not cheap. You can get a fairly expensive gas stove.
My main question is if there's a big delta between induction and Energy Star radiant range, why are they in the same?
Oh, no,
Category.
the delta is between the Energy Star,
non-Energy
non-Energy
Star to Energy Star or induction.
I realize that, but if there's a big price difference between the two, why aren't you separating
well,
that
they
out?
do overlap. So I just want to say that the product categories, the induction stoves tend to be more expensive than the Energy Star Radiant, but that's not. The product category has a window of prices, right, looking across.
I think I understand your question, saying, what we did was, so for this initiative, back to the product definition,
Mhm.
we have made the product definition.
To be
Let's use the
Energy
term
Star.
efficient electric, and efficient electric has two general categories, induction, and then the brand new Energy Star Radiant. There are currently some maybe differences between the Energy Star Radiant and induction. It's hard to get exact numbers on right now just because the Energy Star rating is so new. But I think you're asking, why didn't you separate those two? And the reason we didn't separate those two is because we looked at them as qualified units, right? So we have pricing data, and the bigger difference is between the non-qualified units and the qualified units.
I get that. I guess part of, if we go back to our earlier discussion, when you've said that really you're gonna be focused on the induction and not on the Energy Star Radiant, but if you're including Energy Star Radiant in some of those calculations, isn't that gonna support your data? Because that's not really what you're pushing when you're.
Maybe the question is, how did we calculate the incremental measure cost? So in other words, you had to make some
Right.
assumption
Right. what's
about the blended
weighting-
price.
The weighting
And
essentially, yeah.
I don't know if you know off the top of You're
Not
not-
off the top of my head, that is something we can present in Appendix B and provide additional access to the, we looked at a wide range of products at California retailers trying to find the prices of induction and Energy Star radiant cooktops. There are quite a few across those categories that sort of blend, right? So you have some Energy Star radiant cooktops that are more expensive than the least expensive induction cooktops. So they do sort of cluster together much more, they're more confined than the non-Energy Star coil in particular in radiant cooktops, which tend to be far cheaper, but to the tune of several $100s because they just include far fewer sort of quality upgrades.
Yeah, no, I'm not concerned about that difference. I'm concerned about the fact that this whole market transformation initiative is about induction, not
Yeah,
about
it's focused
Energy
on-
Star radiant. So, I mean, that's my understanding and from what you were presenting at the beginning, you're not, I think you said specifically you weren't going to be pushing Energy Star radiant, you're gonna be pushing induction.
But also pushing Energy Star and Radiant is included in our product definition.
Yeah, and there's certain parts, I mean, there's certain intervention market awareness on health benefits of electric cooking versus, it will have some impact on those, but primarily it's talking about benefits of induction. So it's really hard to slice and dice.
Okay, I'm just trying to
Yeah, I hear you.
compare what I've heard
Yeah.
and the data that's being presented, it just seems like there's I mean, especially if Energy Star 2.0 is not gonna be including Energy Star Radiant, as somebody said, then
But
it feels like,
half of the adoption that Corey showed was Radiant.
I have a quick answer on if there was infrastructure costs for a few substitution in our Ethereum statewide work paper from a gas hot water heater to electric heat pump. It says that infrastructure costs were included, but does not include electric panel upgrade costs. Assume that the electric existing panel could handle the new 30 amp. So it includes a $4 cap off the gas and about a $54 for outlet and wiring. So not the panel, but to Randall's example, it's just that infrastructure cost was included, but not the panel.
$54, is it $54 to run?
That was off a 2022 RS.
That sounds like the cost of the material, not the electrician.
I can't even get an answer on the phone for
Yeah.
$54.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
That's it for a DIYer.
I can add one thing on that, just consistent with that, the October 31st, 2019 version of the commission's fuel substitution technical guide says that the measured technology cost may exclude any additional upgrades required to increase the building's total electric or natural gas load. If those additional upgrades are included in the measured technology cost for the purpose of calculating the incremental measure cost, you should explain why in the work papers, but the necessity of such building upgrades is specific to individual buildings and the cumulative total of installed technologies in the building, and therefore in most cases should not be attributed entirely to a single measure technology. So it sounds like wiring a new circuit for the outlet would be specific to that measure, and so you would include it, but a panel
Not the
upgrade.
panel upgrade.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Understand.
So, Sonia, do you feel like you got clarity on your question? You're still a little.
No.
Okay.
So can, I maybe ask your question in a
Sure,
slightly different way. I
please.
can give you a different question, but I'm definitely interested in the weighting over time of replacement by induction versus radiant, because, and are you using those same adoption curves that Gori presented where we could see the different bars and the different colors? So then those same weightings that change over time also would affect the calculation of costs and benefits over time, because there's a different incremental cost between the two technologies and you're weighing them to come up with this. And there's also a different benefit calculation.
Correct.
And so
Also, and this is also true with the other MTIs, we are reducing the relative cost of the IMCs every year as part of the evaluation going forward, using a learning curve based analysis, basically saying as induction, especially with battery becomes more common.
Yeah.
You're gonna have the benefit of economies of scale and additional market pressure that's gonna reduce the relative cost of measures compared to baseline. So these numbers are the first year IMCs. These are the highest IMCs. Over time, they decrease every year as we expect adoption and MTI initiative action actually reduces the baseline cost of these measures as more people get interested, go out and purchase them. There's more demand, which leads to more people making them, making more of them, and you get per unit costs dropping.
If I could take another run at it.
Sure, that kind of got most of the way. but
Yeah, I think what we're wrestling with is that even though you're focused on increasing induction, you're launching this as an electric cooking market transformation effort. So it's like the outcome is electric cooking in high market adoption. And one of the tools to get to high market adoption is induction, because it provides a superior cooking approach. But the outcome you're ultimately looking for is to shift people from gas to electric cooking. So that's one way of thinking about what this initiative is about. So it's like ends and means. Like induction cooking is the way to get more people to switch from gas to electric. But there will be some of those people who will say, I don't care that much about the superior cooking ability of induction, so I'll take a radiant cooktop. But you've got your endpoint, which is electric cooking now.
Except what I've heard is that induction, what we're looking at is efficient. Is that higher efficiency?
The actual energy savings difference between radiant and induction is 14 kilowatt hours a year.
Okay.
It's like an LED bulb's worth of electricity. The big jump is 15 therms that you save by going from gas to electric. That's the big benefit.
Okay. All right. I wasn't hearing.
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing from you, Jeff, is that people just won't want to do it unless they have a good cooking experience, which is why we need
So,
this. Yeah.
So,
Jeff would do it.
because I'm cheap. I just don't care that much. And I'm not a gourmet chef, so.
I'm just curious, there's been a lot of conversation about the ADU market, of how a lot of people, there's a big push for ADUs in California. And it seems like that's where I feel like a lot of people are like, you know what, I'm willing to put in an electric stovetop in an ADU because it makes my, if I don't have to connect the gas lines or things like that, I feel like there's more comfort, there's a lot of willingness there. So is that kind of been part of this conversation too, just the ADU push?
I don't know that it has been specifically part of the conversation on the adoption side, which is where I think that would probably have occurred in terms of product, both sort of like where would different kinds of products end up? But I would imagine ADUs are more likely to be looking for those, like as we were looking at this morning, those smaller units that are the 24-inch units. And potentially other form factors. But I personally don't believe that I've been involved in a conversation specifically about trying to isolate that ADU market. But Jeff, I don't know if that's something you guys have talked about.
Yeah, we focus primarily on single family, multifamily. The product that we're talking about, like the 24-inch profile, even would be applicable to the ADU market, but we haven't looked at that one directly.
On that note, in this potential, with the, you want to call it ADU 24 or even 3 burner, be included, because in our statewide fuel substitution, it says, it clearly states it has to have 4 or 5. So anything that's 3 or less, and that's something that goes on the next update to this work paper. This one clearly states that it's 4 or 5. It has to have 4 or 5 hobs to qualify. So if that market continues to grow and we don't clear it in here that you guys include, hey, it's whether it's induction 3 or more, right? Because 3 or more would kind of separate the countertop versus the smallest ADU or smallest, call it 24-inch. I think that's important to include that in there, that at least includes 3 or more versus a 4 or 5. We missed this whole market on that.
We'll look at that. We're in the DOE definition now, so I need to.
Let me also offer this, going back to the market adoption modeling that Gory took us through. When we talk about total market adoption or that higher curve that reflects, hey, we decide to invest in this MTI, what happens? When we look at that forecast, the great news about that forecast is we're going to use our data collection that I'm going to walk through to true up our forecast. So every year we're going to put together that group of those sources of data, and we're going to have a method for coming up with, this is a really strong estimate of annual units. And so every year we're going to update the model to include what we're seeing. So like when we ask, will we be including, I mean, so there's the strategy question of, do we discover that ADUs or smaller spaces are turn out to be a niche? This happens a lot with market transformation programs. All of a sudden the data tells us, what's this? This is a whole product, because we're getting full category data that where we see this like spike and we didn't expect it. When we see that, we're going to come back, we're going to include it in the total market adoption in the model. And if we really do see something like we missed that's becoming significant, we're going to update the model. I guess you could have an argument that you should put it in your forecast right now, but what we tried to do generally with this is to base it on things where we have reasonable sources of data and estimates for. As a forecast, what we know is, I think you could say about any forecast, we know it's wrong.
Yeah, right.
Any forecast is wrong. The question is it a reasonable estimate? And do we have a way to true it up before we go claiming impacts from it? So I don't know if that helps, but because these are all really interesting questions and discussions, and we will make sure we're counting, I think, all of that. But some of it, I feel like we need to wait and see how significant it is.
You're correct. Yeah, I mean, that's how we could develop the work paper on the existing data that was there.
Yeah.
Right, so at that time, the 3-burner, 3-hob unit wasn't really on the market.
Yeah.
And one last on incremental cost here, we need a little bit more money on induction, 127, range out, 50 amp, 240 volt receptacle on 30-foot of wiring. So from water heater, we go from 54 to $127.
$127 for the wiring.
For the wiring. Sorry.
All right, Fred, and then we're gonna let Matt continue.
It's just about what is this good for? To me, it's like the benefit cost analysis. I got 2 questions. One, is it intrinsically biased high or low? A whole lot.
Right.
The other one is, if the benefits look like they well exceed the cost, you could be off by a quarter or a third and it's still good. That's all anybody can tell right now. I mean, it's like, does it look like it's unbiased and does it look pretty good? I mean, getting the details right, we're not gonna get the details right, but there's something that looks totally screwy.
I think out of the conversation we've had so far, the gas to electric scenarios probably need to add, I'm still not sure we have the number. What
A number.
a number that reflects the cost of. So some of those houses might have had electric and gas and switch back to electric and they don't need anything, but some of them are probably, most of them are gonna need an electrician to come to the house and run, have the circuit and.
Well, yeah.
And that probably needs to be added to those 3 scenarios, excuse me.
The other thing is, well, does this have too much radiant in it? Well, if it has too much radiant in it, the fuel switching penalty is too high because it's using too much electricity. On the other hand, the capital cost is too low because they're not paying for radiant, so.
It's only 2 scenarios because the last scenario is 120.
Yeah. It's the non-battery version.
The non-battery.
Really would only affect the 130 and the 501.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that negative is probably what.
That negative might go to 0.
It's probably not negative anymore.
It's probably
Yeah.
not negative.
Okay, Matt, you want to go ahead and keep going?
Yes, so I'm gonna run through these relatively fast. I will pause if folks have questions. Same slides as the day before. We have the technology inputs, the program and regulatory inputs, all feeding into our scores. Again, gold being costs, green being benefits. Same set here. One thing I will mention is that we do have in the unit energy savings a fair amount of grid transformation because obviously there's a lot of electrification. The load shape is based on an EPRI load shape. I think Jeff may have mentioned this previously, but the one in the DEER database that is currently present didn't seem to be a great fit, so we relied on a cooking based EPRI load shape. And the EUL for this measure is a bit longer than room heat pumps. We're looking at 16 years, again, based on the California ETRM. On the regulatory side, again, the avoided cost calculator is the exact same. The discount rate is unchanged. The SET adders are the same as room heat pumps. The MTA lifetime, again, the same definition period. And the initiative costs, obviously those are different, but they include the same basic component structure. So again, admin, research and evaluation, marketing costs, and any flow down incentives that would be part of the initiative. So here are our high level results. Looking at about $561 million in TSB for TRC. We did run this with that one case set to 0, and there is a slightly lower TRC of 0.87 I Karen mentioned earlier. In terms of the schedule, there is no approximate break-even year because obviously the current product is not passed. But you can see that, again, it follows that same benefit structure, especially if you look at the PAC ratio and TSB as an indicator. Again, those costs are all front loaded. The benefits do start accruing over time. In particular, this measure, because of the longer EUL and the adoption curve, you do see fairly substantial benefits occurring very late in the MTI. And because of that discount rate, those savings brought back to 2024 dollars are relatively low. So that, again, is part of the explanation as to why the 0.90 is, again, driving it. The biggest factor in TRC versus PAC, as you can see, those are very different, is again, the incremental measure cost. And in a lot of cases, it's that battery powered unit having such a high delta between the baseline or the counterfactual case. That really does, that particular measure is just a very big leap for a customer. And so that presents our biggest challenge there.
I meant to mention this earlier, but so you have, sounds like you have forecasted price incremental measure cost reductions over time. For the battery unit in particular, there's this very large cost associated with the battery itself. I know there are various forecasts for lithium ion battery costs that are out there on the web. Have you used one of those independent of the what I would call a normal incremental cost reduction for a new product that's, going to a scale where you could do economies of scale?
I wish I could tell you right off the top of my head, Jeff. I know that is in Appendix B. We did get into how this particular IMC price reduction was modeled in terms of what information went in there. And I know we tried to be relatively specific with those technologies. I could definitely see what you're saying where, the battery price may be decreasing at a faster rate than the rest of the component prices. So that might lead to an accelerating decrease in IMCs, but I unfortunately.
I don't think we did anything specific for the battery.
Okay.
We did look at different types of technologies. Is Gory still
I
on?
think, yeah, great. One was EV, so that might be a proxy.
Or
The short answer is we did
Corey, you
not.
wanna share?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So the short answer is we did not. What we did do is in the DOE ERE report that I was referring to, they have price trends because of learning, and they have 3 separate price trends. One trend is when a product is newly introduced, it's a evolutionary phase. when there is rapid reduction because of rapid learning. And then there is the mature stage when there is very limited reduction. We took the revolutionary learning rate from the DOE study and applied it to the 120 volt. We did not break it out between battery and non-battery components. But definitely that's something that. Sorry, go ahead.
The net is, you've got a faster deceleration in
Yes.
cost for batteries and for other things.
Right. And,
Regardless of the model used to do it, you did that.
well, yeah, they didn't do it for the batteries separately from
Not
the product.
specifically.
But-
We went with a faster deceleration, but we didn't
Yeah.
try to factor in battery specifically.
I would just recommend that you take one more look at that. If that's because, well, I wouldn't care that much if the TRC ratio was 1.2 or something. But since it's 0.9 and that product is so much more expensive than everything else, and a big chunk of the cost of that product is the battery. And if EVs continue to grow in scope and scale, batteries are going to get cheaper over time at probably an accelerated rate beyond just the normal acceleration of a new quote unquote innovative product. And that was my hypothesis. So I know there's a lot of people trying to predict the price of batteries. So there's a lot of forecasts out there you could look at for that component of cost.
Seems like the other big factor here, I mean, this is even more front loaded in terms of costs than the other initiative. And so that imbalance between early costs and later benefits is gonna with a high discount rate, is gonna reduce the TRC. So, I mean, showing that this high cost test, the primary difference is the lower discount rate, that should get us well above one.
I'm sorry, you did it.
SCT, yeah.
Yeah, the SET does great. So I think it'd be helpful to at least include, make sure you're showing the TRC. Well, I guess it's it right there, right?
Yeah, the SCT has got the lower discount rate, so it looks better.
Yeah. And additional greenhouse gas benefits from fuel switching.
I agree with Jeff that in light of the TRC being below 1.0, this is a good opportunity to look for other reasonable ways of modeling incremental cost decline, particularly for that measure, which is sort of the special feature, right? The 120 with batteries. I also just wanted to follow up on a question Jeff had yesterday. I did confirm that the discount rates are real discount rates. So they're
Thank you.
very steep.
7%. I'd like to get that.
I will mention, we are currently in the process of just finalizing our statewide evaluation for induction. So this would include the non-IOU territory. We do have a number. We didn't want to present it yet. It's still going through the last of our vetting, and we didn't want to present a number that then had to be revised. We expect it to be higher, but the TRC for the sort of official test is still that 0.90. And if you look at it from the California perspective, including the non-IOU territories, we expect that will go up since there will be relatively lower costs in terms of that, we're seeing, yes, there'll be more incremental measure costs, but the initiative costs are not growing. So we just want to make sure we have the right number before we share it with the group.
So none of this may be true, but I just had a thought about the discount rate. In other states, discount rates used for efficiency and other resource planning are based on the utilities risk adjusted cost of capital. We have just exited an inflationary period and are moving into a low inflationary period, we think. And it may be that number is an artifact of a couple of years or three ago.
Yeah.
And as the utilities and the regulators, okay, you know the answer.
I do. I work on cost of capital
It's gonna go
proceedings.
down, but tell me what
We,
So it's the weighted average cost of capital and it was just, it has just been updated effective January 1, 2025. ROEs have come down a little bit. And I would presume that the number that's now in the avoided cost calculator is probably the currently effective number, which was adopted effective 1/1/2023. So it's not that old. The reduction that's going to show up is an ROE reduction of only 35 basis points, but when you do the weighted average cost of capital, it's going to be a pretty small reduction. So all of this is to say, even if the 7.3 is currently effective, then it's going to drop a little bit 1/1/2025. It's not going to dramatically change.
Okay, nice try, never mind.
Good try.
I'm gonna lean over 10%.
Talk a little bit more about this.
It does, but that's who it is.
All right, Karen's gonna wrap up here. Thanks, Matt.
Nice to.
Relative to yesterday, again, because I found it got over
So I'm gonna, no, it's, I saved that page last week.
So I showed this to you guys yesterday and just our foundational principles for evaluation, they're the same today. This also was vetted and reviewed. The evaluation plan Appendix F was also reviewed by the evaluation advisory group. And same thing, the evaluation objectives are the same pretty much for most MTIs. I'm not gonna say always, there might be something extra, but. Same today. So, market progress indicators for induction cooking. They do kind of parallel, there are some parallels with room heat pumps. So these follow what Elaine walked through and what you've been taken through before with the initiative strategy and interventions. Again, this is not 100% of the market progress indicators. Those are an attachment to the evaluation plan Appendix F. You can see the whole list there. But just to kind of look at them in thematically here, we have the manufacturer engagement, product innovation, and so the market progress indicators include the number of manufacturers that we have agreements with, the number of competitively priced 120-volt battery products. That's a lot longer. In demand aggregation, we have bulk purchase agreements, inclusion of induction products in other California programs, particularly those starting in the HJ communities. We will definitely be working to lower the price premium on induction products, and we will be tracking market progress indicators will include the price of those products versus alternatives. We talked more yesterday about the whole electrification and rate structures. We will also be tracking that. So we're not the prime mover in that. For product availability, we'll be tracking the share of qualified products stocked in stores. That was part of our market characterization study. Induction is present. Induction cooking products are present in stores, but in some stores more than others, and not as a huge proportion today. Again, the appendix shows you the baseline values for everything. We will also be tracking, I kind of shortened this because it was a lot of words, but in-suite builder availability. What I mean by that is we did some qualitative research with builders. They identified a few market barriers specific to them. Those included their customers aren't asking for induction, so they're not going to build or remodel not to the customer specification. But in addition to that, they said that some of the volume builders, at least one volume builder we talked to said, when you do want to build with them, they have found delays in getting products. And that it's not always like maybe, when the builder buys, when a volume builder buys products, there's a suite of, there tends to be a suite of appliances. And there's tendency for induction just to show up in the premium suite, like the cook, chef suite or whatever, and so that's not everybody. So what we mean by in-suite builder availability is, and I'll show you in a minute with milestone, we have set a milestone with this, that 4 brands have in-suite availability of induction product in your regular suites. And then also Energy Star 2.0, we talked about that before, that will also available in marketing. And the last one here is demand stimulation. What's the big one for this initiative? Consumer and property manager awareness of health and safety. This is generally how we're referring to this. I know sometimes we say, health concerns associated with gas, but really this is what we're focused on. This is this initiative. I'm doing some research to figure out what is the most compelling way to the consumers about it. What messages do they want?
So I probably should have brought this up earlier. But we've been talking about it around here, that induction cooking is a superior cooking experience in some ways. It's different than gas, but steam lab people would say it's an awesome experience, not just a different experience, but it's an awesome experience. I don't want to lose track of that for some folks, they might actually prefer it over gas cooking. Not tolerate it, but might actually say, hey, it's got these other benefits. So this message is sort of like safety benefit is almost negative. I don't want to lose sight of a market progress indicator around people's perception of induction cooking as a superior cooking experience.
And I wish I had the full list of market progress indicators. I mean, we actually have quite a several associated with perception, awareness, and perception.
Okay.
Of the thing.
Oh, okay.
Not the minutes on it, but I don't know exactly
For like short words for that box, maybe if you were trying to just add that one other concept, it could be awareness of health, safety, and cooking satisfaction. Something like that, just to.
Or we call them non-energy benefits. Safety part.
I only believe that's what will drive sales.
Yeah.
Tolerate something, but if you're gonna get more of them to buy it, they have to love it.
In general, I would say what we'll be tracking is awareness of benefits. Benefits, all of them, and preference.
Wondering, maybe it's covered it or it's embedded in here, but I can see all of these market progress indicators looking really good, but you're still not winning hearts and minds. And I'm wondering how can you measure that? What could be an indicator of fact that you've actually not somebody say, yeah, I know safer. Yeah, I know it's this. Yeah, I'm aware of it. Yeah. But you're gonna have to pry what I have out of my cold dead hands. And I'm not gonna switch. So, and I'm not saying how to do that or asking how to do that. I'm just saying, how do you know when that happens? What is that indicator?
I think it's a really good question. And we do have some questions from the baseline survey of consumers and property managers that were about preferences that may not be the answer. You know, we may want to think about it more and make sure that we feel like we're capturing that, but we did ask questions about general perceptions, favorability, and then we did ask questions about, like, if you needed to purchase something, needed to replace your cooking equipment, what would you be likely to purchase? So I do think that can capture it to some degree, that together with like just the general preference type questions, we may want to consider building on that. Those are all things that I think if we get the objectives right, you know, the evaluator, third party evaluator can, I'm sure will have suggestions. So I think the point is well taken, and we will make sure to clearly identify the need to track whether we're capturing those hearts and minds and preferences.
Forgive me if I asked this before, I can't remember. Each of these initiatives roll out, and there is a residential baseline survey, and then there's residential tracking surveys. Are those like one survey for multiple programs? Or do you have different surveys for each with mutually exclusive sampling frames, or what?
For the baseline,
The baseline and the update.
we did a single survey for both.
And as other missions go forward, you can try to roll them into one survey cycle, or are you gonna do different surveys?
It totally depends on the market.
Yeah.
So like the sampling needs to reflect the market. Because if we're trying to get reproducible statistics of things like shares, and preferences, awareness. And so for these two products, it made sense to use the same study for future products. It just depends.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, and saying, I don't know who's first.
I just wanted to, like, again, maybe I'm just gonna beat a dead horse on this ADU thing. I just, maybe because I'm, to be honest, transparent, I'm not like sold on induction so for myself. Like, I'm not like, you're prying it out of my hands. That's my opinion. You can debate, we can discuss it over lunch. I just feel like for me as a person who is not a fan of induction cooking, I was very willing to do electrical for an ADU.
Oh.
And so I think like that's a real good opportunity. So just kind of like putting it as a note is to really think about the people who are trying to get ADUs right now, but also not to take it from a permitted stance, just being very transparent. There's a lot of people who are willing to do ADUs, and ADUs, even if they're unpermitted. So don't take the like energy code route to like, oh, we're gonna update the energy code and the ADU, like forget about that. I'm talking about like backyard.
Rise.
Maybe that's my experience. That's like the garage, the conversion. I think that there's a lot of potential there and a lot of selling point because it's easier to do an unpermitted ADU if you don't run gas to your backyard.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I think there's a lot of potential there. It's
dangerous too.
but this is the reality. Like, I think this is what I'm struggling with, is that like, I think some of these conversations are very much in like, oh, this, you know, everyone follows the rules. They care about the health benefits, all of that. When in reality, I think there's a lot of benefits of the ADUs, doing electric because of you don't have to do the permitting for the gas. Now that, yeah, it's unsafe. People are gonna do it anyways.
Who's
It's
actually,
safer than an unpermitted resistance stove.
I don't want to cut off discussion, but if you were the last question, what I would say is that's a perfect segue into the next discussion of the ultimate metric, the market share and the units. And what are we going to be looking at? Because like what I would say is we're going to capture those units.
Yeah.
I think there's another point that you're making too, which is to be thinking about strategy and market strategy. And how do you capture that? And that point is well taken.
Yeah.
From an evaluation standpoint, I feel confident we're going to capture that.
Yeah, sorry, it's not the last question, but I'm just curious how you're tracking some of the equity and kind of EJ elements through this. I know you said inclusion in other California programs, but are you specifically tracking? Is there some kind of an indicator that you're including in other kind, like especially capturing the hearts and minds, that's a whole realm that I feel like, yeah, has a strong equity element.
I'll give you a partial answer and I'll also say that you can find more detail in Appendix F, but the quick answer is, so it depends on which metric we're talking about. So in the baseline, in the things that we're tracking via surveys, so like the consumer survey, the property manager survey. First of all, in the consumer survey, we didn't sample by ESJ community, but we did break out the sample by low income. We have had with the evaluation advisory group a conversation about so we did that because that was a practical way to sample, an easier and practical way to sample. We have discussed that it would be good if we could figure out a way to translate that into the ESJ definition, which is different. There's overlap, but it's not the same. So one answer to the question is that anything that we're tracking by survey, we will be tracking. And for right now, it's been defined as low income, but possibly also by ESJ, if we can figure out a practical way to do that. For other metrics like inclusion in programs, we're going to be tracking statewide the programs that we have engaged with and that end up including this. So we're recapturing data on all of that. I'm not going to be like for all the metrics, but the share of qualified products stocked in stores, we are going to be tracking that for the Energy Star RPP retail products platform program. We're going to be identifying stores that we're designating as ESJ serving, and we have a definition for how we've identified those. And we're going to be tracking to make sure that the models are stocked in the stores and that the price points on the models are appropriate. So in other words, I don't think retailers would make that mistake of only putting the super high-end products in the stores. They know their markets better than we do, but we will be tracking all of that. So it's a little different. I'm just trying to illustrate it's really different for every metric, but in the evaluation plan, we do identify that. Mm-hmm. Other questions? Okay, so yeah, subset of the market progress indicators, they're all in the evaluation plan. And then once again, though it takes time to see the big growth, we will be for the entire time tracking market share and units of adoption. And similar to yesterday, not quite identical because it's not HVAC, so it's different data sources, but we'll be getting shipment data. This is why I'm saying I'm confident that we will capture some of these other products. We'll need to do analysis to figure out, where they're going. We will be using the surveys that I just described, as well as other secondary sources such as RAS, the residential appliance saturation survey that California does periodically for saturation. And then for actual sales by sales channel for retail, right now we expect to have Energy Star retail products portfolio data as long as we're running a program through that platform. There's also the possibility of purchase data through outlets like Circana. And then there's the whole builder channel for these products. And so we expect that if we do engagements with, if we are engaging with distributors and builders that, I know Elaine mentioned one case in which somebody talked about a data sharing agreement, a particular distributor that serves ESJ communities, I believe. Also, if we're negotiating bulk purchase agreements, we'll have the data from that. And similar to what I described yesterday, once we get this data, once we get up and running, we have the first year of this data, the third-party evaluator will be coming up with an estimation approach completely transparently, like how we're doing that. This is very, very typical like all programs to need to do this. You never have like 100% of the data. So coming up with here's our formula, how we're going to calculate it each year and then tracking it, you know, over time. And then just to wrap up with milestones. So this is similar to what you saw yesterday. It's kind of like on the journey to the milestones that we think really matter, putting a stake in the ground. The first couple will be that having manufacturers sign on to the tech challenge, developing those product roadmaps. 3 bulk purchase agreements in place with California production builders. So there you see the builder intervention. Share of induction products in brick and mortar retail that's participating in ESRPP increases, and prices are lower in ESJ serving communities. That's one I just mentioned before. 4 brands offer in-suite induction models in most builder packages with normal shipping timelines. That speaks to the in-suite issue that I was discussing before. And then, so now we're into like 2029. This is sort of midterm. Incremental cost of 240 volt induction versus electric radiant is less than 10%. This kind of goes back to some of that conversation we were having before. We really want that to be as close to no difference as, you know, as possible.
Erin, quick question about that one. Is that radiant Energy Star or non-Energy Star?
It's that's a good question. It's a good question. I want to look that up. Or Elaine, do you know off the top of your head?
Cost in the last one?
Yes.
Yeah.
That, I think that's the non-radiant.
The non-Energy Star.
Non-Energy Star, excuse me.
Okay.
I think so.
I want to look it up. Okay, yeah, and if it's not clear in the market progress indicators, we'll just need to make it clear. Yeah. Okay, also, we're in this mid-range 2029. We expect to see market.
Question, I'm sorry, from that previous one, so the question was about the price difference between induction and whether or not it's electric radiant, but if we really are looking at what we're trying to get to is electric cooking, shouldn't we also look at that the incremental cost between Energy Star radiant and non-Energy Star radiant somehow include that?
And those costs versus a gas replacement cost.
Yeah.
When we really want to see a reduction in incremental cost.
That includes
parity.
the adder that we just talked about.
That's really a much more important.
Yeah.
Really, it's the gas.
If we could get to parity with a gas cooktop, then you just take the price incremental thing off the table as an issue.
Right. You're right.
This is a good one to follow up on. It obviously at minimum needs clarity, and then we need to also consider what we want to be comparing it to. Reconsider what we want to be comparing it to. Like we had a lot of these conversations, but I can't accurately. Okay. Market share greater than 10% by 2029, just for a point of reference, we estimate it to be about 3% right now.
For induction
Or
or,
electric, or yeah.
Induction.
Oh,
okay.
In 2030, Energy Star version 2.0 includes battery equipped products and a 10% reduction in efficiency.
That gets to your point earlier, Haley, the version 2.0, we would be looking at this.
What was that like?
Couldn't hear that.
No, we couldn't hear
Sorry,
her.
and that gets to the point Haley was making earlier about that there's efficiency gains to be had within the.
Within the Energy Star spec.
Yeah.
That's what the plan says. Yes,
Glad it's
the
in there.
plan makes it clear.
I just wanted to link it to bill impacts, because this is mostly peak usage, so
It makes total sense.
it's really important.
And then by 2033 is when we think we'll see 2 or more competitively priced 120-volt battery products. And that they'll be no more than double the average price of regular induction.
That goes to the battery.
Yeah. I was just gonna, I said this in a previous meeting, but it isn't really what we want to get is the battery products priced competitively with the 240-volt induction products plus the cost of upgrading service. Because as we just talked about, you're gonna need an electrical service, not upgrade, but not at the panel, but you're gonna need to run a 240-volt line. That's gonna cost something. If you could make that cost of the 240-volt product plus the installation costs competitive with, or if the 120-volt product was competitive with that, again, that would be a great target to shoot for. If battery prices come down a lot, then yeah, that would be.
I will just generally say, I think we need to, in general, when we're talking about the regular 240-volt product, that we need to include costs that we just discussed about being able to plug them in essentially. So yes,
You get parity.
in terms of competitively priced, we did have a lot of conversations internally about what that meant. This is where we landed, no more than double. I think maybe I'm hearing you suggest it could get to parity.
Yeah.
And I think the conversation about battery and we will consult with the forecasts on batteries so that we, aren't generating our own forecast. And I think we can take a look at that, but we didn't feel like parity was realistic when we looked at it before. That I can tell you, but I mean, we'll look at it. Yeah, I think we need to look at it again. We need to look at the battery forecasts and then sort of see where we are.
Can I'm wondering what we're trying to do with that particular indicator. Like the energy savings is not gonna be different.
It's not about energy savings.
It's not about energy savings, it's about, but the choice for a consumer would be between gas and induction and whether or not I can do a 240-volt versus the 120-volt. So anyway, I don't know.
There is significant grid benefit to the 120-volt battery product. That's just kind of strategy may change and shift over time, but if that product came way down in prices very quickly, then we could shift our strategy more towards that product. The negative grid benefit you saw in the TSB go to zero.
I forgot about that, yeah.
Because of
Good point.
peak load impacts. Yeah,
Well, less load, you're adding less load
Yeah.
and you can shift it.
and you can shift it, yeah.
That's great.
Other questions, comments?
Look at this one. Look at this
Yeah,
one.
definitely. Okay. This is just a repeat of what you saw yesterday, how we'll be, kind of the way the process works and tracking these over time and bringing them as part of our quarterly updates.
So part of the plan or back with milestone is to influence 2.0, right? Energy Star. How do we go at a greater level with DOE and treat the radiant as the incandescent light bulb? And
Right.
get those out completely,
We've talked
right?
about
And
that.
induction is the LED, right? So they're both electric, but one is manufactured anymore, right? And so how do we at the same time influence that? Like, hey, let's treat the radiant as the incandescent. Induction is LED. How do we transition
At least now, starting in, is it 26? That the feds actually have a standard for cooking, which they never even had before, right? I think it's I thought there was some preemption challenges if California were to try to do it before, but getting the feds to do it at least in the near term, the next 4 years might be really tough, but maybe later.
The Energy Star Relief to do, I like to say it's probably a little farther out than 2033.
Yeah.
So for folks, we can take some more questions, but I want to just tee up. We're gonna do a public comment period now. So if folks have statements they want to make, you can raise your hand and Alyssa will unmute you. Thanks, Karen. And then we'll hear from you in your own voice, and those will be put in the record for the meeting notes for this meeting. And then we're gonna go to lunch. So, but if folks have additional questions or comments, we can certainly take them before we break. So Alyssa, did anyone have a comment to make?
Not currently.
Okay, and we will have another comment period at the end of the day too. Just give that another minute. Anything else from this group while we're waiting for folks to put their thoughts together? Carol, you wanted to make a comment? Sure.
Yeah, you're using the term in the plan, you're using the term limited income and low income sort of interchangeably. So it would be good if you defined what you mean by each to help the reader understand which programs you're going to be impacting. Also, this affects the metrics because the low income is a separate proceeding and I think they have their own metrics. So if you're reporting savings, you might need to break out savings that fall under the low income proceeding and savings that fall under the EE proceeding.
Thank you. Okay, and I think Weldon Kennedy. Alyssa, you're gonna unmute Weldon. Hey, Weldon,
there.
can we?
Hi, yeah, it'd be great to, you were saying the analysis of the swap out costs from going to gas to induction, including the entire retrofit cost. It'd be great if you published an estimate of what that is to understand, what parity actually looks like. And so separating that out from product cost, saying, hey, what is the actual estimate that CalMTA says that the average cost is per building would be fantastic to have, I believe.
All right, anyone else? Okay,